Good afternoon and good morning. I would like to thank you all for joining today's discussion from so many different countries. The climate crisis is a global challenge which requires urgent global action. Unchecked climate change will produce devastating effects for our planet, the environment, and the people's well being. The consensus is clear. There is a pressing existential need to limit global warming to 1.5 Celsius degrees relative to pre-industrial levels. We have to move to a carbon neutral economy by this mid-century. The challenges to achieve this target are huge. We need to dramatically reduce consumption of fossil fuels, coal, gas, oil in the next decade. Establish taxation for emissions and the tools to enforce it. Provide vast funding for the development of new clean technologies. Secure a fair and just transition to clean energy for all people. The Harvard Business School Club of Greece has a long tradition of addressing the important global and local issues. We have invited to this panel today some of the world's leading personalities on climate change, statesmen, policymakers, and scholars to discuss these issues on a national, European, and global level. The unique caliber of our distinguished panelists require no detailed introduction. The Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, the Head of the UN Sustainable Network, Professor Sachs. Being the moderator, I will be asking the relevant questions and seeking your penetrating answers. Starting with Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Prime Minister, you have been a leading voice for reducing greenhouse emissions in Europe and for the decarbonization in Greece. What is your vision for Greece's energy transition? Which specific actions do you prioritize in order to achieve the 55% emissions reduction by 2030 and net zero by 2050? How do you plan to finance this energy transition that requires these substantial resources?
Stelios, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join this very distinguished panel. It's a pleasure to see you all. And let me start by congratulating Frans Timmermans on his leadership and his visionary goal setting on behalf of the European Union. Greece supported from the very beginning the ambitious targets set by the European Union, by the Commission, the Fit for 55 agenda, and of course the goal to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And I think we've been taking the leadership on various fronts and coming up with a concrete plan on how we can actually achieve these ambitious goals. Our number one priority, Stelios, was to completely reconfigure our power generating sector. And 2 years ago, before the discussion at COP, which focused around coal, we had already taken the decision to phase out all our lignite electricity plants, the latest by 2028, which was an ambitious decision at the time. A lot of people accused us of taking the decision prematurely. It actually allowed us to be leaders when it comes to developing just transition policies. I was just 2 days ago in Western Macedonia, which is the equivalent of Greek coal country, discussing with the citizens about our ambitious just transition program. And I'm glad to see that many other countries are following and accelerating their timetable in terms of moving away from coal. This is going to be our number one, obviously, priority, at least until 2030, and the single biggest contribution in terms of reducing our emissions. We have just tabled to Parliament our first climate law, which does two things. First of all, it sets up a proper governance framework to make sure that we monitor and track all our goals and have the proper mechanisms in place to involve all the stakeholders towards achieving these goals. And of course, it sets a series of intermediary goals regarding major initiatives that we need to take in our path towards decarbonization. We've also taken the decision to establish another intermediary goal to reduce emissions by 80% by 2040 in order to have a better visibility in terms of our long-term policies. You asked a question about financing, which of course is one of the big challenges when it comes to the green transition. Let me make two quick comments. First of all, I think that the RRF was a milestone in the process of European integration. For Greece, it means 32 billion euros of additional funds over the next 5 years, 19 billion of which is going to be in direct grants, a significant percentage of which is targeted towards the green transition. And of course, the whole goal is to make sure that we leverage private funds in order to create projects that will be economically rational for private investors to participate in. I think the second big debate, which we will have at the level of the Council, has to do with the future of the Stability and Growth Pact. I happen to be in the camp of those who believe that the ambitious targets that we have set ourselves will require a rethinking of our fiscal policy in the medium to long term, and that the straitjacket of the previous Stability and Growth Pact is frankly obsolete. I think it was obsolete even before we set the very ambitious climate targets, but certainly now where it is clear that we will need additional funds for investments that will have a long-term return on capital, finding the right balance between funding the green transition while maintaining fiscal discipline. I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion we will have at the Council over the next year.
Thank you. Managing Director, the crucial public good of reducing large-scale emissions requires a major intensification of global mitigation efforts, especially in order to achieve the 1.5 Celsius global warming. How do you envision the role of such an important international institution like the International Monetary Fund in supporting these climate targets and helping to implement the policy decisions?
Thank you very much for having me on this panel. Bravo to the European Union, bravo to Greece. You have been leading the world on this most important transformation. We had not only have to do, but do it in accelerated mode. The IMF has a clear mandate, and it is to care about macroeconomic financial stability, growth, and employment. The climate crisis puts this stability at risk, and with the same token, climate action offers once in a lifetime opportunity for transitioning to green growth and create jobs. And this is why climate action is at the heart of what we do at the IMF. We have adopted a strategy that defines what our contribution can and must be, and it consists of 4 elements. 1, bring climate, and especially mitigation for high-emitting countries, adaptation to vulnerable countries, into our regular assessment of the well-being of the economy. The technical term is Article 4 consultations, and make sure that policymakers are integrating experience from elsewhere into their own policy framework. And I'm very pleased to say that out of the 20 large emitters, already 12 are engaged with the fund into that Article 4, countries like China or UK. My second point is that with a huge role on financial stability, we produce the financial assessment reports again on a regular basis. Very clearly, climate-related risks have gone up, both physical risks from weather events and transition risks. We are bringing into this assessment the professional contribution of the IMF. If you recall, the IMF invented stress testing some 2 decades ago. We are now working with the Network on Greening the Financial System to bring climate stress testing into the work we do. 3, data. Good data means good decision making. Climate data must be part of macroeconomic data. And we have now moved in that direction very strongly. So again, both private sector and policymakers can be well informed. And last but not least, we are a financial institution. We are now creating a new instrument. It's actually very exciting, first time in the history of the IMF, that would provide long-term financing for climate action as well as building resilience to acts of shocks like the pandemic. We are naming it Resilience and Sustainability Trust. Our objective is to have as a starting point 30 billion. It comes from the special drawing rights that some countries have plenty of and don't.
Okay. We have lost Mrs. Georgieva for a second. It's natural, she will come back. I will jump to the next question to the Executive Vice President till Mrs. Georgieva comes back. Executive Vice President, you were the influential European voice during the Glasgow conference. We all followed enthusiastically your statements for the end of the call. The agreement for reduction of methane emissions and several specific climate deals were substantial gains. Many decarbonation pledges were made. However, we must still narrow considerably the global emissions gap. How do you assess the outcome of this Glasgow conference? In what respect does it promote your European policy agenda for the Green Deal? Thank you.
Well, first of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to be on a panel with friends and such knowledgeable people to boot. We are in the middle of this incredible transformation, and it is such a pleasure to see Greece leading this. I have to tell you, we went through such difficult times in the last 12 years, and very often it felt very lonely at the Commission, supporting Greece and making sure that Greece had the opportunity to prove its incredible resilience, and Greece did that. And now we see, this is true leadership to commit to putting an end to coal. And it's also smart leadership because coal is phasing out. And the sooner you make the right decision, the sooner you will be part of the new economy. And I think this was one of the clearest results in Glasgow, is that people understand there is absolutely no future in coal. Even countries such as China, India, South Africa, Indonesia, who today still hugely depend on coal, understand. And that was one of the, I think, most important messages of Glasgow, that there is no future in coal. And we need to understand that we need to help those countries exit out of coal, give them new opportunities, let them be part of a global economy where they can resource their energy in a sustainable way. Just avoid some of the mistakes we made in our industrialization and jump to the fourth industrial revolution immediately. I think that's the main task. And that's actually the main task we will have between now and Sharm el-Sheikh when we meet again for COP. I also want to pay tribute to Kristalina and what she's doing at IMF. I keep saying our international financial institutions were created in 1945 for the world of 1945. And now they have to address a world that is radically different. So we need to make sure we adapt that. Also, the Maastricht Treaty was also created in a world right after the end of the Berlin Wall. Europe and the world has changed massively. And I would join the Prime Minister in saying we need to look. We don't need to change the treaty, but we need to look at the way we apply the treaty in a period that's now coming. And I want to insist on one thing, which I believe is extremely important, and that's also something I brought back from Glasgow. We will need levels of investment that we haven't ever seen before. This industrial revolution is the most intrusive humankind has ever seen, because it's a completely new technology that engulfs the world completely. It doesn't leave any part of the world aside, at a time where humanity has to learn to live within planetary boundaries, at a time also with incredible geopolitical tensions. So I don't think we've ever been challenged more than we are challenged now. And again, in that context, I believe Glasgow was good news, because the world came together. Yes, it could have been more ambitious in some points, but 1.5 is back. Countries will have to come with enhanced plans before next year, before the next COP. We have said we put clear language on coal. We have put a clear program on deforestation, on combating deforestation. We are much more committed to helping developing countries with adaptation than we were before the COP. So I believe the COP is, many were a bit negative after the COP, but now you see in the third and almost fourth analysis after the COP, people becoming more positive about the results, because they do give us an opportunity to shape the world of the future. The only thing we don't have, and that's the problem, is time. And I don't think we ever needed to invest so much money in such a short period of time. The sooner the world understands this, the sooner we will be able to find solutions. Thank you.
Excellent. Professor Sachs, in order to sustain globally the 1.5 Celsius target, we must reach net zero by mid-century. But countries are still building coal plants and increase their coal consumption. The national commitments are not going far enough. In your opinion, which are the main challenges globally to achieve the 1.5 Celsius target?
Let me also start by thanking you for the opportunity to be on the panel. And indeed, we have three of the great world leaders in general and in this effort on the panel that I'm joining. What Europe is doing, let me start by saying, in the European Green Deal, is the global pace setter, no question. And it is the role model that all other regions need to follow, and many are following. And when we have a country like China saying net zero by 2060, be sure that is the result of the European Green Deal as being a prod and a spur and a role model for China, but also for Japan, for Korea, for countries all over the world. So the leadership of Europe is really crucial and exemplary. And Prime Minister Mitsotakis' leadership in Greece is part of that, of course, is path-breaking. And we need the financing. And that's where the IF and Kristalina Georgieva's leadership plays such a big role. Well, we are not on track, as you said, far from it. Even if this were a mission of complete goodwill everywhere, with a unanimous what to do, this would be extraordinarily difficult. Changing an energy system fundamentally, one that developed over the course of 2 centuries, based on fossil fuel, to one based on zero carbon energy, is complex, period. And to keep the world economy going and moving forward at the same time as this transformation is being accomplished is a huge intellectual, conceptual, political, organizational, managerial, financial investment challenge. That's a starting point. Second point, it's not only the energy sector, it's also land use that is a critical component of success. We know that the land use sectors, agriculture, forestry, and related sectors account for up to 1/3 of all greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide from deforestation, methane, nitrous oxide, and the like. So there's a tremendous need for land use change as well. The European Green Deal recognizes that in the Farm to Fork program, because the European Green Deal is the holistic model, indeed. Circular economy, decarbonization, farm to fork, sustainable land use. That's why it's such a powerful role model. Having said all of that, this is not a world of goodwill in general. This is a very divided world. It's filled with antiquated incentives, systems of greed. It's a general principle that wherever there are fossil fuels, there is a lot of politics involved and resistance to change. There's a big question of how these changes will affect geopolitics. There's also the fact, which I deplore, of the tensions between the US and China, which I view as completely unnecessary. And I attribute mainly.
It's one of my questions.
Yes?
Later. It's one of my questions later.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. But all of this is to say huge technical, practical challenges. And I'll make two quick observations. We need engineers in the forefront much more than they are right now. So this is one point that we can come back to, because this is to an important extent an engineering challenge. Second, we need a new financial architecture. I just looked yesterday. I was a little surprised to find that only 2 low-income or lower middle-income countries, only 2, currently have investment grade ratings. 138 countries in the UN do not have investment grade ratings right now. That means under Basel III, that means in bond market sales, that means in practical finance, they are out of this story right now. And so we do not have a financial model that is going to finance most of the world. And the rich countries absolutely did not solve that. Again, for a lot of reasons, I'd put my own country, the United States, as culprit number one in not focusing on this global financing issue. But I would say more generally, the rating system is broken, and we need a new way to get market capital to low and lower middle income countries at good terms, not at 10% interest rates, but at 2% interest rates, so that this transformation can be financed. And with all that $100 trillion that was announced at Glasgow, none of that's going to low and lower middle income countries right now, because they are rated as sub-investment grade. And so we need to crack a very practical finance problem.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you. Prime Minister, the recent increases in gas and electricity prices might cause some time of popular dissatisfaction against the clean energy targets. These price increases could persist during the transition to clean energy. How are you going to safeguard your vision for a post-coal Greece, maintaining the achievements of decarbonization while also taking care of the society?
Well, that's a difficult question, and it doesn't necessarily have an obvious answer. As we're moving away quickly from coal, we do recognize that natural gas has an important role to play as a transition fuel until we reach a penetration of renewables that is going to be very high. And of course, at the same time, until we solve the electricity storage issue and or build the necessary interconnections to have a totally fluid and liquid electricity market. So we've been hit hard by the increases in the prices of natural gas. And the question that we still probably have not answered is whether this is a one-off event or whether there are structural problems in terms of our electricity market. I know Frans thinks that the second is not the case. And I would advocate in favor of the approach that we have for a more sort of liberalized electricity market. At the same time, if there are interventions that can take place, be it in gas storage or be it this idea, which is still an idea, I don't know how it would work in more detail, of a more centralized purchasing of gas by the European Union to increase our market power. Certainly, we should be able to entertain and examine these ideas. At the same time, we need to make a convincing case to our citizens that renewables are right now the cheapest form of electricity. So the fact that the price of gas increases is not an argument to keep coal alive for longer. I constantly have to answer this question. But we also need to be aware of the fact that it is costing us a lot of money to support households right now. Because if we cannot do that, if we cannot cushion the increase in the price of the electricity bill, then we risk losing societies, because the green transition is going to be very, very painful, especially for the poorer members of our society. So we, as most European countries, are currently using funds. In our case, it's ETS funds, but it could also be direct funds from the budget to cushion this increase in the price of gas. If this were to become a structural problem, a longer-term problem, then it would cost us a lot of money to actually do that, which would make it more difficult from a budgetary point of view to address the issue. One last point: diversification of gas supplies is obviously important. That is why the Eastern Mediterranean is an important region for Europe. Of course, the current gas findings in the Eastern Mediterranean cannot necessarily compete with the amount of gas that we import from Russia, but they could certainly add to our mix and help us be less dependent on Russian gas. That is why infrastructure projects of common interest, be it pipelines or virtual pipelines — by virtual pipelines I mean constant flow of LNG, possibly from Egypt to Greece and from Greece into the European gas system, is of such importance. So there is a geopolitical element to what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is important not just for Greece, Cyprus, but for the entire European Union. And that is why I think we need to pay more attention to our part of the world, not just as an act of solidarity towards Greece and towards Cyprus, but because what's happening in our part of the world is important for the long-term energy stability of Greece. For example, one last point: we plan to build an electricity interconnection with Egypt. This is very important because Egypt, of course, has access to very cheap renewable energy. And when we talk about interconnections between North Africa and Europe, the natural entry point for cheap electricity produced in North Africa would be through Greece, one of the natural entry points. Tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, Greece could be the entry point for green hydrogen. So we need to look at the geopolitics of energy and not just focus on what's happening with Russia. Russia is, of course, very, very important, but it should not be our only supplier of gas or of electricity or of hydrogen in the future.
Excellent. Managing Director, you made a signing comeback. We lost you for a minute, but you signed again, so that's wonderful. Many believe that without a substantial carbon price, the targets set in Glasgow will not be achieved. And unfortunately, there is still political resistance. Please elaborate how the International Monetary Fund envisages addressing this issue so we can help direct private investment and innovation to clean technologies.
This is a great question, and if we don't answer it, we can look at our beautiful plans as just a mirage that would disappear in the desert. Without a carbon price, we simply would not speed up rapidly to get to a point when the transition happening on the scale necessary. Why? Because the pressure from the market simply is not there. At the IMF, we have done a lot of research on where we are today, where we have to be, and how we can get from here to there. Where we are today, average global price of carbon, $3 a ton. Where we have to be by 2030, $75 a ton or more. How can we get from here to there? We are recommending creation of a kind of coalition of the large emitters and introducing what we call international carbon price floor that is related to level of development and in that sense is fair. Richer countries will have a higher floor. Poorer countries would have a very low floor. All that are in this category of large emitters join forces so we can accelerate this transition. We also recognize that while our economists, and actually this is a widely shared view, believe that the most efficient way to introduce carbon price is taxation. And we know there are great examples of countries that have successfully done it. There are political realities, and there is also an advancement in carbon trade that makes cap and trade similarly a good avenue for pricing carbon. After a lot of discussions, we concluded that we should build the biggest possible tent and include not only tax and trade, but regulatory equivalency. In other words, if you have regulation that pushes the price, de facto, the price of carbon up, then that equivalency can be counted. And this is for countries that neither are able to go with tax, nor right now can massively go with trade. And Jeff, I'm not going to name the country, but you are its citizen. So let me put it in that way. We need everybody to come in, and then we believe that we would have a carbon pricing on a scale that is equitable, pragmatic, and it can move rapidly to a point of action. The European Union way is helping with the legislation on carbon adjustment tax. Why it is helping? Because it says, hey, you don't have a price, you come to our markets, we will impose one on you. And that helps other countries to start saying, well, maybe prefer to be taxed, but to have carbon price on our own. In the European Union, Germany has been promoting a similar idea. They call it carbon club. Whether it is club or floor, our bottom line is we want to win this battle against the climate crisis. Markets have to help, and carbon price is a market instrument that can be incredibly effective. It would also generate revenues that can be deployed for public investments and to remove obstacles for private investments, transition to happen faster.
Thank you. Executive Vice President, the European Green Deal constitutes a groundbreaking political agenda. However, achieving the ambitious goals requires vast financial resources and strong support by the public. Which are the biggest challenges that you face in implementing the Green Deal in Europe?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. I think it boils down to two major issues, I would say, today. By the way, that might change because this is a very volatile environment we're working in. But today, I would say two issues. One is the issue of energy transition. That is so complex because we know in the existing energy markets, the relationship between offer and demand is so intricate, and the smallest change in offer has a huge price effect. On demand, it's different, but still. And the underlying infrastructure necessary to make the system work is also incredibly intricate. You don't replace that overnight with a sustainable energy mix. So this transition will be extremely complicated. And as the Prime Minister has said, this could be accompanied by volatile price developments because investments, Kristalina has calculated that we still invest $11 million, I think an hour it is, in the fossil fuel industry, or was it a minute even? I think it was even worse. To redirect that investment in the right direction is a huge challenge. By the way, just look at our member states. Look at the plans Germany has now made. So they're going to exit out of coal even quicker, 2030. They're going to not do anything nuclear anymore. That's also very clear. So they will be needing massive amounts of gigawatts of energy. And what will they be looking for? Of course, increasing with 30 gigawatts offshore wind will help, but it's way too little. So they will be looking at natural gas. I'm absolutely sure that will be not permanently, but for a longer period of time, an important energy source. And that comes with a lot of geopolitical questions. So just flagging a number of the issues we will have to face in this energy transition. And that's not even the toughest part of the Green Deal. With huge distance, the absolute toughest part of the Green Deal is the social component. This is an age of profound transformation. The only way we can get where we need to be in a democracy is to be able to convince the largest possible majority in our society that we're doing this in their interest. And I don't think we're there yet. We're a long way from there yet. And there are political forces in all of our member states who are trying to exploit the fear for transition, who, since the 1980s, step by step, especially the middle classes, have lost faith in the political system, have lost faith in a market economy, have lost faith in their prospects. And we need to restore that faith. It's the only way we're going to get this transition done. I'm very sorry, but that's, I think, the single most profound challenge we face as politicians, as societies, also as industry. And I think there is a good story to tell here. But we have to have long-term transformation accompanied by short-term positive results. People need to be able to see that we are acting in a way that reflects their interest. That's why compensating people so that they don't end into energy poverty is of extreme importance right now. And I think we have the instruments to do that at the national level. The Prime Minister said he's using ETS funds for that. I think that's a wise decision. Because of the higher energy prices, member states had an extra income in ETS of 11 billion euro this year. And they could put this to good use to support their citizens who are faced with higher energy bills. But they could also do other things, help people in the transition, get them better mobility, help them refurbish their housing so that it's less energy consuming, etc., etc. But we have to show, and also skilling and reskilling people so that they can take one of those 2 million jobs we envisage will be coming with the new economy. Because there will be new jobs, but old jobs will disappear. That's in the nature of industrial revolution. So the one challenge, and let me end on this, the biggest challenge, and I don't want to make too many historical comparisons. We are in an industrial revolution that is only comparable to the first. And of course, history doesn't repeat itself, but as Mark Twain said, it rhymes. And if we let another proletariat come out of this industrial revolution, we will have the same political revolutions, turmoils. We have the same extremist political views that will dominate our politics. So we have to be careful. This transition will be social, or it will not happen.
Excellent. Professor Sachs, you are a big supporter of the cooperation between China and the US, and especially on climate change, contrary to the mainstream American thinking that we both face in New York. Are you more optimistic following the common agreement between the world's top emission emitters announcement together in the Glasgow conference? Are you more optimistic?
Not very much right now. I'm more worried because the politics are not good, and the simple-minded tendency to blame others for one's own difficulties is very high. So I'm very happy. John Kerry worked very hard to get an agreement with his Chinese counterpart, and that is very good news. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot of political pressure in the United States to have as tough a line on China as possible. It's very dangerous. It's very reckless. Why is the United States inviting Taiwan to this meeting of the democracies in a few days? This is just provocation. Why are we trying to turn up the temperature on all of this? Well, because we have as always in the United States, we have a very tough right-wing politics, and then we have a lot of moderate politicians who are afraid of the right wing. They don't want to look soft. So this is driven by the same U.S. hegemonic thinking that has been part of our foreign policy that led us into a lot of wars and a lot of recklessness, mainly by politicians that don't have passports, I would add. But then the good people are afraid of these people, so they want to look tough also. So the administration doesn't lose an opportunity to look tough on China. It's afraid not to. And this is very dangerous, actually. It goes even to a larger question. And I'd like to just riff off of Franz's analogy to the Industrial Revolution. One feature of the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century was that it was a European and US revolution and left the rest of the world dismally behind. In fact, most of it became part of European empires. If there's a lack of social trust within Europe, think of what the lack of social trust globally is right now. The feeling, what is all of this? Now you're telling us what to do again. But we don't see even serious efforts on finance. We don't see anything serious sharing technology. All we see is the two big giants fighting each other, telling us don't go to this one, don't go to that one. The lack of distrust globally is enormous, and it was the real story of COP26 because look at China, I mean, and Japan. India. Sorry. Look at India. India was the big force at COP26 that said, we barely want to talk about this. We don't believe this. We don't want to be tied down on anything. But the truth is, no one has discussed with India serious financing. No one has discussed with India a serious program. That's 1.4 billion people. By the Africa, even less. So it's another 1.4 billion people. I'll just make one specific recommendation. I love the IMF's policy for getting that carbon floor. And my view is that we should also use that as a benchmark for financing. Simple calculation shows that if the high-income countries would be levied $5 per ton of CO2 emitted, and the upper middle income countries half of that, that would be $100 billion in the kitty. If you took half of that as grants and you put the other half as leverage for borrowing, maybe 5-time leverage, you'd get about $250 billion total per year out of a very modest carbon levy, which would not only put the responsibility where it ought to be, but it actually would help to solve this financing and global trust problem. We need to hold the world together on what is this extraordinary difficult transformation. And remember, the developing countries will be far, far more than half of total emissions. Right now, they're half. They're going to be much more than half. So either this is a worldwide effort, or Europe acts a beautiful way but doesn't solve anything in the end, because Europe is only a small part of global emissions. And so this is the real story, is bringing the whole world along. Boy, is that a hard thing to do.
Thank you, Jeff. Prime Minister, first of all, I got from the public several points to congratulate the Prime Minister for having Greece as a major nation in green energy initiatives, and that Greece is becoming a place where change is happening. The reduction of the emissions of the shipping industry is for a long term a desired goal for the European Union and you personally. You have been instrumental in guiding the Greek shipping industry to take the initiative for establishing competitive advantage with new innovative technologies and new fuels. What is the current status? And what is your position also on potentially hydrogen production, storage and transportation? Thank you. We can't
Global
hear
shipping
you.
accounts. Yeah, can you hear me now? Yeah. Global shipping accounts for a little bit under 3% of global emissions. Yet almost 90% of goods are transported by sea, and it is not clear at present how shipping will effectively decarbonize. And that is why I think we need more resources and do more research in terms of the technologies available for the shipping industry to drive through the necessary changes to reduce the footprint of shipping in terms of global emissions. We've suggested of setting up an EU research center for alternative marine fuels and technologies. And I've also nudged Greek ship owners to be leaders rather than followers when it comes to the green transition, as we play an important part in the global shipping industry. But it is not yet clear which technology is going to dominate. And this is not just about ship owners, it's also about the developers of the technology. So it's about the big engine manufacturers, it's about the big shipyards. So we all need to work together and make sure that we do not undermine the competitiveness of European shipping in the process. Shipping, as by definition, a global industry, needs to be very sensitive to regulation that will compromise the competitiveness of European shipping companies. In principle, we've discussed the extension of the ETS scheme to shipping. We're not against that, but it should just happen in a way that makes sure that the revenues from the ETS are allocated in a proper, in a proportionate manner. And I'm confident that we will find the solution to decarbonize shipping. It is just not clear at present what this solution will be. One very quick comment to follow up what Frans said in his previous intervention, because I think it is absolutely critical regarding the social cohesion of the green transition. I think it is very, very important in terms of our policies, at least those policies that are currently funded through innovative financial instruments such as the RRF, to make sure that the positive impacts of these policies are felt by as many citizens as possible. Let me just give you one example. Retrofitting buildings, in my mind, is one of those policies which are a win-win for everyone. It reduces footprint, it reduces the energy bill of buildings, it creates lots of jobs, it supports local industry. So let's make sure that we give our citizens tangible results of projects that have a positive NPV without requiring significant additional financing, in order to make sure that we get them on board. If this is just an elite project, which we talk about in our nice sort of Davos style fora, then I'm afraid we will be faced with the social reaction that Frans spoke about. And of course, I can tell you the anti-vaxxers of today are those who will, tomorrow challenge, the green transition. We see that in Greece very, very clearly. Those who are against the wind turbines, and you can see all sorts of conspiracy theories emerging around the green transition. So tangible benefits for citizens as my number one priority in terms of designing policies at the beginning, because we need to build the momentum.
I will go to the Executive Vice President. The transition from fossil fuels to clean energy is crucial also because it raises a number of acute geopolitical issues. You wrote a recent article in Project Syndicate. How this transition could strengthen Europe's geoeconomic and geopolitical position and tilt in its favor the new balance of power?
Well, had we started with the Green Deal 5 years earlier and had we built substantial amounts of renewable energy, we would not be seeing these energy prices today in Europe. It's that simple. But in the transition, I also want to take a geopolitical position on this, if I may. We have to make sure that some of our partners, even if sometimes they are difficult partners, that rely for their economy solely on extraction of fossil fuels and the sale of fossil fuels, get an opportunity to develop out of that. And of course, when I say this, I'm talking about Russia. We have to make sure that we give Russia an opportunity to be part of this transition as well. I'm not saying this because I'm naive about Russia. I'm saying this because, for me, an unstable and poor Russia is a much bigger threat to our security than a stable and prosperous Russia. So I think we have a huge task here to make sure that Russia is helped with technologies to reduce their methane emissions in their extraction processes, which today are huge. And if you could capture and store that methane, that would already make a huge contribution to reducing emissions. We have to help Russia develop decarbonizing natural gas at the source, and then they could turn that into blue hydrogen. Of course, we have a preference for green hydrogen. Let me be clear. But in this transition, we will also need blue hydrogen. It's absolutely inevitable. So I'm just mentioning this because I believe that there's no sector has more the potential to create, tensions, if not wars, than the energy sector. We've seen that for 200 years now. So we need to make sure that this fundamental change, we allow those who take longer for that change also to be part of the new construction. And I use the example of Russia, but we could have spoken about the Gulf, where there's exciting developments there as well. We could have spoken about Egypt. We could have spoken about North Africa. I am a huge proponent of the use of hydrogen, and that will be blue and green. I mean, it is an incredible opportunity for Africa. We have so much sun, so much wind. You could produce hydrogen in such quantities that then you will see a rapid change also in shipping, Prime Minister. Because I do believe the future of shipping is with ammonia, green ammonia produced. The shipping companies I know are big fans of that. But indeed, the Prime Minister is right. We need to bring the technologies. We need to bring the investments. So this energy transition should be also inclusive. And even with our competitors or our rivals or people who today use their energy to, in a sense, blackmail us, we need to understand that they will be part of our future as well. Russia's going nowhere. It will still be in Europe. So I thought I'd take, in answering your question, a bit more of a geopolitical view, because I believe we have to be very, very realistic about this.
Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, a very important issue is that in order to decarbonize the economies, the private sector is vital to be steered to the green investments, which present really, for the private sector, a huge investment opportunity. What can the financial system do to help mobilize these resources for the green investments?
Not only we need massive redirection of private money in the order of at least $1 trillion a year, but a large portion of this has to go to emerging markets and developing economies for the reason Jeff described so well. If this doesn't happen, and today it is not happening, even if Europe does all that Europe promises to do and more, we are in trouble. Everybody has to step up, and the private sector is a tremendous force for transformation. But if the conditions for private sector participation are right. So what are these conditions? I spoke about a carbon price. I don't want to repeat that. Obviously, expects forward guidance as to how carbon is going to be priced and how this price is going to go up over time. And that is a huge incentive for investments. It ought to be there. One thing that we have to recognize is that the coverage of carbon pricing today is only 23% of emissions. Obviously, that has to change fast. Secondly, what is the use of public money? Public money, and I want to thank the European Union for giving that example of how public money can unleash private investments. Public money is to remove barriers, such as investment in research and development cannot be done company by company. There is a need for consolidated funding by the public purse. Making sure that the infrastructure that is necessary for greening the economy that would not be done by private sector is being done, and Europe is stepping up charging stations as one of these components of infrastructure. What public money should not do is to substitute for private money, and unfortunately, we still see a great deal of financing, especially from the multilateral financial organizations, being well-meaning, project-oriented, but not necessarily barrier removal from the perspective of bringing private money in. For us at the fund, a huge objective is standards and disclosure. The EU, by the way, is leading also on taxonomies. As if I may, EU taxonomies are very complicated for poor countries. And we have to find a way to build a bridge between the appropriately high standard in the EU towards practical standards for developing countries, so the financial sector can also recognize these taxonomies and these standards and move there. Obviously, regulatory oversight. One thing we do now at the fund is to look at financial systems, or more broadly, conditions for private sector participation, to make sure that if something is labeled green, it is actually regulated and can be identified as such. And last but not least, creating the incentive for private capital to take a bit more risk, to go to emerging markets. I discussed this with Jeff. Obviously, we don't want to lift the burden of risk from the private sector altogether, but we have to find a way to improve the conditions for investments, whether it is by creating these standardized agencies that are able to guarantee first loss for greens in an appropriate manner. But if we don't resolve this problem, we cannot get out of the situation where we are now, which is the money is there, it exists, but it doesn't go where it would make a difference. From our side, as an institution, we take our responsibility to help countries make themselves more attractive for private investment in renewable energy, in new technologies, and make them excited about the leapfrogging they can catch today, but will be an opportunity if they don't gear up sufficiently right now.
Thank you. We have reached the 1 hour limit. I have many questions for you, but I'm trying to keep it correctly. I will do something very quick. I will need 1 minute answers. Quick one. Prime Minister, the Mediterranean Sea might be severely affected by the climate change. Faces many complicated issues, from legislation from offshore wind to fish farming. Which actions do you plan regionally for the Mediterranean?
We saw what happened in the Mediterranean this summer. We are feeling the consequences of climate change. We're feeling it today. Wildfires, floods, extreme weather events, they've become the norm rather than the exception. We've set up a ministry for civil protection and climate crisis to coordinate our policies. There's much more we can do. Vice President, at the level of coordinating our responses regarding civil protection, our number one duty to our citizens, towards our citizens, is to protect their lives and their livelihoods. And we have interesting ideas in that respect. And when it comes to the seas themselves, we need to work closer and cooperate more in terms of making sure we designate larger chunks of our seas as no-catch zones. Otherwise, our fish stock will continue to get severely depleted. These policies actually work. You end up with more fish if you just protect part of your seas. So it's a win-win also for fishermen, but we need to get them on board and need to explain to them exactly what's in it for them.
Jeff, 1 minute answer, please. The US policies on climate change range from the Trump's rejection to Biden's renewed engagement and the activism by John Kerry. What is your opinion for the achievements on climate of the current administration? 1 minute.
The administration is properly oriented, but so far has not been able to pass anything through the Congress. The Congress remains much hands of big oil and big coal. Significant
Jeff,
piece of climate legislation in 30 years. That's our problem. We are captured by the fossil fuel.
Okay. Given that we spend the 1
Stelios,
hour,
I'm not sure whether you that.
we couldn't. We didn't clearly hear you, Jeff. We missed you a little bit.
I think big oil sabotage Jeff's answer.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished guests for addressing some of what we think are the most urgent issues that humanity currently faces. You provided great guidance and direction on how to mobilize the governments, the civil society, the policymakers, the financial sector to move towards cleaner energy. It's clear the task is daunting, but by cooperating, we can transform this period of current adversity into an improved shared well-being for us and the coming generations in order to avert climate devastation and achieve, most importantly, a sustainable future for our planet. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you.